Hi, today we're going to talk about variables in Java. So let's talk about declaring. You guys all know about declaring your love to somebody. It just means telling the person, I love you. Well, with declaring variables, you're telling the Java program, I am going to use an integer called num. Okay, so you do that usually at the top of your program. You name your variables, you choose a type for them. Double height, which would be a real number, which would be called height. Boolean flag. A Boolean is a variable that can be only true or false, and here we've got one called flag. The next thing you will want to do is to initialize. Now, initialize means you set to the value or put in the condition appropriate to the start of an operation. So you get something going when you initialize. So to initialize num, you could set num equal to 100. Or you could make price equal to 59.86. Or you could make flag equal to false. These are all examples of initializing the variables. You're just giving them a starting value. And remember that the equal sign is also called the assignment operator. So here we talk about assigning a value, like 100 is assigned to the variable num. In RAM or memory, this is what it would look like. So we'd have our little variable called num, and inside the box in RAM, the value 100 is stored, and it's got a little label. It's an integer type. So all three of those bits of information are important for Java to know how to work with this data. So we're going to use 5 main variable types. First of all, a Boolean, which is a true or false, the most simple little type of data that you can have. All it can tell you is, yes, I am true, or no, I'm false. That's all it can store. Then the next biggest size is a char, which will store a character. That's basically any character that you can see on your keyboard. That value can be stored inside a char. Then you get an int, which is a positive or negative whole number. So a whole number, remember from maths, is a number without anything behind the comma or the decimal point. Examples are -9847 or 845. Then you can get a double, which is where you store a real number. Here's an example, 99.4563. And the next one we'll use a lot is a string. And in a string, you can store text. Examples are a name or an address or a sentence and that type of thing. And a string you will put in double quotes. An example would be timber. Here's some more examples of declaring and initializing. You can do it all in one go. So we've got Boolean answer is our declaration, equals false. That's where we initialize. So the Boolean variable is only true or false. Remember that. Char initial equals C. Remember that chars are written in single quotes. Double height equals 176.5. Here's a real number. And string city equals Manchester. And remember that strings are written in double quotes. Now make sure that whatever name you give your variables describes well what is stored in the variable. Here's a little experiment. We're putting different amounts of drops of fertilizer on a plant. And we want a name for the number of drops of fertilizer. We need a variable to store that. Now a good name would be drops fertilizer. A bad name would be Dr. Fert. How would I know that's not Dr. Fert you're talking about? So remember to not be ambiguous when you call your variables. Here are all the rules for variable names. These are important to obey. If you don't, your program won't work. You cannot start a variable name with a number. Don't put any spaces in the middle. No special characters like percent or the accents or an ampersand or a star. And they can contain numbers in the middle, just can't start with a number. Don't use reserved words. Reserved words, if you want to test whether a word is reserved or not, type it out in NetBeans, and if it is reserved, it will turn up blue. These are the conventions, which mean that they're just good manners for Java programmers. So your program will still work if you don't follow these, but you could lose marks in an exam. So variables and methods must start with a lowercase letter. So your program will still work if you don't obey this, but it doesn't look great. Only class names, these are your programs, they must start with a capital. And all the names must tell you what the variable or the method or the class does. Now, the camel hump method is the way we used to name variables. It just means that each new word in a variable name must start with a capital. An example is date of birth. The O is a capital, the B is a capital. That's all for today. Goodbye.